The startup struggle, what it really takes to build in MedTech.
Hi, good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us today for a very interesting panel. We'll try to keep it very natural, and because most of us are here as entrepreneurs and mentors for entrepreneurs, so we'll try to cover most that is faced by us in this today's time. So as we know, you all come from a very diverse background. We have Joanna, who is investor turned into entrepreneur. And we have Yan Lin, who is a great mentor and handling the ecosystem with the help of helping commercialization and business development to several different startups around the globe. And I have Dr. Viviana with me, who is tackling a very sensitive innovation across the sector. And we have Andrew Glass, CEO of Vivasure, to advance innovative vascular closure technologies. And last but not least, I have Steve Gardner with us, MD for World Health, and we'll dive into the questions now. And bear with me, I don't do much of these moderations, actually. So I would like to start with one question to all. What was the moment in your journey when you genuinely thought this might be it, and you felt that that's it? You just felt like it's not working out. So what was that point from all of your perspectives? If you could please share.
Sure. I think that probably happens to me once a month, if I'm being completely transparent. I think if anyone's built a company, especially in the life science space, you know how many different stakeholders it takes to pull together, how unpredictable biology can be, and how challenging that can be. From my perspective, though, I think that first transition into the clinic, those very first few clinical experiences, those first patients, that's kind of the place where I have experienced the most kind of risk and sleepless nights. Thankfully, in our case, we're a clinical stage company and our patients have all gone safely, but there's still that unknown in that first jump. So that's where I've experienced those.
Thank you. Yan.
So before I went to the other side of the table and became more of a mentor and helping do the development work, I was in startups before, two separate startups. And whether I'm the mentor or I'm in the startup itself, the moment for me was the same. I tend to get involved in companies when they're very early, when it's more technology than a product. And the moment that you just realize, this is going to fail if I don't change something big, is when you see the founders fracture, right? They're not singing from the same songbook. Mm-hmm. They're going their separate ways. They're thinking about the product or the future very differently. And that's when, for me anyway, is the realization something has to change here or it's not worth investing in. So, and that has happened in the companies that I've worked for, as part of the founding team, but also in the startups that I mentored.
For me, as a good scientist, is always driven by validations. So you're always going to have the benefits of the doubt unless you validate an idea, technology, whatever validation, big or small. I believe this is usually the turning point. For us as a company, I mean, my company was called Bequalize, and we just decided to rebrand it. That's an example of a big shift. And this is an example of when we tested and then we decided to go with a different name. And branding is everything these days for the communication. So, yeah, but validation.
Good.
Yeah, so just by way of background, Vivasure Medical was a company that had been around for over a decade by the time that I joined in 2000. And for those who don't know, we just sold the company for 185 million euros in January of this year. So we made it to the finish line. But the first few months when I joined, one, I realized the product didn't work. Two, my CFO said, oh, by the way, did you know that we only have 2 months of cash? And three, we also had founders who were fighting. So I was like, wow, why did I leave the corporate world to come to this? So that was definitely the moment for me that I was like, we're probably not going to make it.
I think the interesting thing is that sometimes when everything is about to fall over, you don't actually know till it does. You know, anybody who's been involved in any kind of startup, particularly if you're bootstrapping, will have had those sleepless nights when you're just staring at the ceiling going, it's payday on Friday, I don't have enough cash to pay my people, and I certainly don't have enough cash to pay me. But it's those, look, I mean, being an entrepreneur is character forming, right? Because I don't know how many of you've got kids, right? But your kids don't learn to walk without falling over a few times first. And you don't learn to be an entrepreneur without doing the same thing. Yeah, every failure is a learning moment, and actually it's taking that experience and not making those mistakes again and again and again. And I think that's for me is the real crux of it is fail fast, and pick yourself up and do it all again. Because the other thing about being an entrepreneur is it's addictive. Once you've done it once, you just want to do it again. You go through all that stress and pain, and then you suddenly decide, oh yeah, okay, I've sold now, or I'm doing quite well. I've got customers. I know what, I'll start another business. Why do we do that to ourselves? I don't understand that.
Thank you so much. So I'll come back to Andrew yourself. You led Vivasure through FDA pivotal trials and late-stage fundraising. So what's your experience been in different phases of this process?
A roller coaster would be the the experience. So yes, when I came on board, we were able to get some funding. I think I told you in 2020 when I joined in COVID, we had no money. That we were able to raise a Series D round, which allowed us to go run a US pivotal. And at that time, which I think is kind of similar to now, like if you put something like health tech in your pitch deck, you probably got funded. Whereas we were not that. We were a medical device. So in our space, there's a lot of dead bodies. So we had a very difficult time raising the money. But we did find a strategic partner. A long story about that, which was a bit of an emotional roller coaster ride. And then we started the US pivotal trial. And we had done 2 EFS studies. So I highly suggest if you have the opportunity to do an EFS study with the FDA. Because what it does, the early feasibility study does is allows you to start a discussion, interaction with the FDA early. You don't really need to have a really robust clinical trial. They'll just allow you to get started. So you start making relations with KOLs and centers and getting contracting done, setting up a US legal entity, the business license, all these small things that you need to do. And when we did that, the first 2 EFS studies, we applied for CMS, Centers for basically the funding. And those were both approved within a month, no problem. We got funding for a trial and off we went. When we did our US pivotal and we went down all of our risks of things that could go wrong, from getting sites up and running, patient enrollment, inclusion criteria, so on and so forth, we never thought about the CMS aspect. And sure enough, 3 months later after we submitted our application, they denied it. And it was the most ridiculous reason why they denied it, but we were in a denial situation, and suddenly the vast majority of our centers are like, well, without that, we're not going to start enrolling. So all your timelines and like your funding that you've raised is kind of out the window because some bureaucrat has suddenly made a decision. But yeah, so we worked through that and we figured it out and we submitted to the FDA. But I think just kind of to the general comment before, in these jobs, you're a problem solver. You have to find a way and figure out a new situation. I knew nothing about CMS. I've come from America. I've done clinical trials in the U.S., but I didn't know like where do we start with this? Who do we call? You would call the CMS, and they're all government bureaucrats, and they're like, they wouldn't respond or would tell you, yeah, we'll consider it, send it back in. But when you're 9 months into the process and you don't have any solution, so we found a lawyer who knew a lawyer. Who used to work at CMS, and then we were able to get a call, and then miraculously you just got approval. These are the things you have to do. So it's always about finding a way and not getting caught up in the kind of the emotional aspect or the consequences, and just like, look, you got to bear down and figure out how to make it happen. So I'd say for us to go through that process, it really was not just for me, but the whole team of figuring out ways to get through it.
Thank you so much. Joanna, for yourself, oncology surgery is like something that we can't really have any labs. So how do you balance speed, safety, and innovation in that space?
Yeah, I think the key there is, I think I often say that move fast, break things can't exist in healthcare. I just, don't think that's appropriate or ethical. And so there is this kind of natural tension when you bring innovation to healthcare where, speed and safety often seem like they're opposing kind of forces in that field. For me, I think when you're, again, in that first transition into the clinic, the biggest thing is passing that red face test with yourself and your team. Would you feel comfortable enrolling someone that you love in that trial with that new device or with that new technology? And that's kind of the ethical question you have to answer for yourself as a founder. Is it safe enough that you'd use it on somebody that you'd love? But at the same time, balancing that without getting too mired in risk aversion. That can be challenging as well. Just kind of trying to de-risk almost everything. There's always gonna be some level of risk in that first transition. So making sure to strike the right balance between those two things is really important.
Thanks. Viviana, I'll come to you. So as we are in 2026 and a lot of movement in the AI and digital health space, but my question is, how do you build the trust between the regulators, clinicians, and patients at the same time to be part of these new innovative MedTech and AI-enabled operations?
That's a very good question. I think it's a process, and we are not there yet fully. I believe that patients actually trust the implementation of AI, and this has been my experience and what I've noticed, that actually most of the innovation sometimes is driven more by patients than physicians, because there is not enough time to catch up with everything that is happening. So the regulatory is there. Actually, the UAE is very forward thinking with this in this regards, and so many other countries. So I believe that once the benefits and the risks are assessed, it's going to become more and more adopted worldwide. But this is a very general question, so it's hard to pinpoint.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity here for all of us as well, because the generation that is going to be coming in like in the couple of years, they are very savvy towards AI and AI in healthcare. So even like my own 17-year-old son, he feels more comfortable with the doctors and clinicians who are using AI than those who are not ready for it. So I think there is a huge opportunity for all of us who are into that domain that we can really get ahead with that. So Jan, what's the most damaging regulatory mistakes startups usually make in your experience?
Perhaps you're the best person to answer.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of the mindset here. So usually a startup is pretty good at getting their regulatory strategy down. So they figure out early on, yes, I'm a 510K, or I'm a class 2, or I'm a de novo. They usually address that issue quite early, and that's great. Where they tend to fall down is when they think that the compliance portion of that is paperwork, i.e. fill in the blanks after you've sorted it out. Okay, but that's not the way that it works. The regulatory process, it's called a process, runs throughout the entire product development. And it's really, probably the easiest way to think about it is there's 3 stages. The first stage is say what you're going to make. What's your purpose here? What are you trying to do, right? So those are your requirements. The second stage is you make something that meets those, what you said you were going to do. And then the third stage is the validation and verification, which is I'm going to test so that I can prove to you what I made is the thing that I said I was going to make, okay? Therefore, the documentation, all that compliance stuff is not something that you do at the very end, just before you try to put it into the regulators. It's the documentation that shows that you've done every step of this process. And unfortunately, 3 to 4 times a year, I will have conversations with a startup that has spent a lot of time and money making stuff, and then they say to me, I need you to come and help me do my design history file. I just need a few tweaks for design for manufacturer. 6 months, I'm going to be in the market. Oh, by the way, I don't have a QMS. Sorry, it's not 6 months. It's going to be 2 to 3 years to get you there. Okay? So you cannot backfill everything because they want to see how you thought about things every step in the process.
Thank you, Steve. Coming back to you. So you deal with a lot of international governmental and regulatory bodies. How do you see that in today's time we are getting more cohesiveness among different regulatory bodies? Are there any bridges being built? How do you deal with, because I know you work across the different domains, so how would you explain that?
Cohesiveness amongst regulatory bodies, that's an interesting idea, isn't it? Wouldn't that be a great idea if we could do that? I mean, it riffs really off the two answers we've just heard for me. The regulatory piece is interesting, but you know, that's your kind of enabler, that's the kind of last thing that you've got to have that in place to go to market. Yeah, the piece that we were talking to Viviana about around the different elements of the process in terms of clinicians, funding. There's so many kind of pieces to this jigsaw puzzle, aren't there? You know, and it's kind of how do you, healthcare world. Just for a bit of background to understand why I'm actually sitting here, what we do, as well as being involved in conferences like this, chairing panels, having conversations, we've got a great network across the Middle East and globally, and a lot of what we do is around socializing startups, scale-ups, and bringing them into new markets like the UAE or Saudi, and helping them to understand not just the regulatory environment, but also the healthcare environment, the providers, the payers, the governments, etc. And I think for a startup, there's that thing about how do you get all of the pieces in the puzzle in the right places. So starting with that structure, so Viviana, talking about what you were saying around is it clinicians? Is it C-suite? Is it, if you're a digital solution, is it the CIO? Yeah. What is the product, as Jan was saying, and how do you define what it is you're building and what it is that's trying to do? I mean, the first thing, the number of startups that I've seen cross my path that you sort of sit there and you go, you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. A lot of clinician entrepreneurs are great. God love them. But quite often they're trying to solve their problem, not the healthcare system's problem or, God help us, the patient's problem. So that first thing about like, what is your solution? What's it there to do? What are you trying to understand? And then the question of where in that ecosystem does it fit? Yeah. So understanding the needs and the requirements of the health system, what is the health system trying to achieve? Where does this fit into their kind of policies and practices? And then actually, when you get to that point about who's your customer, and again, I mean, in a system like the UAE, your customer might be the provider hospital, it might be the organization itself, it might be government, it might be payer. It could fit anywhere in that ecosystem. Who's first and who's your champion going to be? Yeah. So how do you let's take the example of a digital solution. I've chaired a couple of panels this week with CIOs. And one of the questions we asked for CIOs was, how do you decide which digital projects fly and which ones fall? Yeah? And then what's the best way for an entrepreneur to approach you as a CIO, or you as a clinical provider organization? The really interesting answer I got back was workforce sits at the heart of most things from a digital point of view. If I'm going to implement an AI solution in my hospital, it's got to be something that makes my workforce more able to work to the top of their license, more able to spend time with patients, more effective at being able to actually go and deliver the care and the services that you want to. Yeah, that's how I decide what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. Yeah, and you've got to solve all of these problems first. And then, as Jan was saying, you've got to think about the compliance and the regulation and how does it fit in from a data point of view? What's your business model going to be? Can you come in with a POC contract in the first instance? There's so much of that you've got to think about. And that's before you've even got to the point of the question, which is from a government and regulatory point of view, how do you fit your product and your solution into that to that environment? So it's a complicated process. That was a complicated answer, actually. But yeah, I think it's about having the right partners and the right people around you and the right advice. So many people want to give you advice. So much of it is not worth the paper it's written on. And to your point, any health system has complexity. We had a long conversation about Saudi Arabia, didn't we, before we came in? If you look at all the different bodies in Saudi, from the health holding company to the clusters to the CNHI to the Centre for Privatisation, you've got this alphabet soup in your head, and they don't talk to each other. So I think that's not really an answer. The answer is it's just complicated.
Yeah,
I think if I can add to that,
yeah, please.
one of the themes I'm hearing though is this is still an old school relationship-based business.
Absolutely.
And like, you know, I think Andrew, you mentioned like hiring a CMS, a lawyer that formerly worked at CMS was kind of the key to cracking your way in there. We have the same experience with, hiring a former FDA reviewer as our regulatory consultant. That's still, I think, really key to getting things done in our business is that kind of relationship piece.
And as a CEO, you've got to have your eye on the detail, and your eye on the data and on the processes, but still be able to lift your eyes up and look at the horizon and be able to see where you're going and where you're headed.
I think this is very interesting. Let's have everyone's perspective on that. Andrew, please, if you could share.
No, I was just going to add, because you're talking about the countries, I found it interesting. I spent a lot of time in Asia, and back in America, they would always kind of group all the Asian countries together and be like, well, how's it going in like Asia, And we think like, well, how can you group Japan, China, India together in terms of like one market, And I also think to get to the point is even here in the Gulf states is like kind of grouping them all together is sometimes a bit naive because each has all these nuances which he was speaking to. And you're talking about regulatory dynamics. I mean, many years ago, there was this whole plan with the Japanese Ministry of Health, like, harmonization by doing, that they would coordinate with the US, and then you would be able to kind of like file for one, it would work for both. That never went anywhere. Like each one is a separate application still. Each one has their own little nuances that you have to work through, but that gets to the point of you've got to kind of figure out how to make it happen in each of the different markets, which I believe is a good thing because that means you can go, work through those problems and solve them, and you just got to find the right people, and events like this are helpful in terms of networking and getting out there and knowing who can help you through these dynamics. I think it's very dangerous oftentimes when CEOs are very kind of in their own little world and think they have the answers, when in reality we don't half the time know what the hell we're doing, but we have to kind of figure it out and have a good group of support to get to the finish line.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, you market context is so important because every health system is different. Every payer model is different. And you talk about Asia, lumping Asia together. I have the opposite issue a lot of the time. I'll get VCs or startups coming to me saying, we want to go to the US. My first question is usually, why? Because they think of the US as a single health system. It's not a single health system. Every state is completely different. You've got different regulators in each state. I mean, that's,
Well, okay. Yeah, yes. But keep in mind the U.S. remains the fastest uptake of products, the highest pricing, and still to today in medical technology, the biggest market by far. So there is, like, as an investor, there's such a desire to go to the U.S. I mean, being a European company, when you would talk to different investors, they're all like, what is your U.S. strategy? Right, like, because that's where you can get the real upside and get an exit, which is what everyone's really caring about. So, but like, there's one regulatory system to get approved in the U.S. You're right. Each selling in the U.S. is a different, complicated beast of it. But like, I wouldn't say that it's like
one of the issues I've always felt that. And again, this is about that piece about market context. If you're going to take a new product or an innovative service into the US, one of the first things you always need to think about is the fact that it is the most commercial health system in the world. I remember doing a panel in Chicago with the ex-head of Medicaid from New York, and I said to him, tell me all about the US healthcare system. And he said, Steve, it's not a health system, it's a health market.
Yeah.
So understanding that it is so commercially driven. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I would say the U.S. you can get things going, but it's also very expensive. So, sales rep in the U.S. in medical devices cost $200,000 to $300,000. In Europe it'll cost a fraction of that, or elsewhere. So there's these dynamics that I think you have to appreciate. There's huge upside, but it costs a lot. It takes a lot of energy, et cetera. But yes, that would be a fair way to look at it.
One of the reasons why we tend to bring a lot of clients from Europe and the UK and Europe, we tend to bring them here first. Because if you think about that kind of dynamic of health systems, you've got European health systems where it's a little bit more outcome-based, a little bit more value-based, a little bit more government-led, as opposed to the US, which is the opposite end of the spectrum, where everything is payers, insurance, commercial. And actually, the Middle East is a great kind of middle ground because you've got a bit of that kind of government-led and a little bit of that private insured-led. So I just think that's quite an interesting thing.
Can I please take your perspective and then Jan's as well on this?
My perspective?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because you are from the US, you have a European company. I'm European, I live in Dubai, I have a US company. So we're all
United Nations here,
yes.
right?
Well, the US is still one of the largest market, as you mentioned, and so most people, of course, they always want to go there. I agree, it's very hard to navigate different markets. I think the UAE and GCC nations have done a very good job to enter this market, and they're very, you can navigate, it's not always easy, but if you come from the US or Europe, Saudi FDA, or it's really not that difficult to navigate. So it's a painful process, but thank God we have these processes because they are for the safety of patients. So this is what to keep in mind. Yeah. And technology, one thing if I can say about my experience is that what we created is actually, I decided not to go into the medical, but to stop into the wellness sector because it's easier. But what I created came from patients actually. So I listened to what they wanted and try to create a solution for them. Key. Yeah, of course, now I'm exposed through my job to a lot of innovation actually coming to integrating more into the medical. And we mentioned about the AI, there are millions of AI agents coming into medical practice every day. We were just coming from WHX and I don't know how many companies coming with their own AI agent for dictations, for the notes, for even sentimental analysis now on voice center. When you call the hospital, they can analyze the emotions of your voice. So a type of AI that is coming into healthcare is great. And I think that we're just living, instead of looking at it as a pessimistic and hard way because it's so controlled and regulated and definitely difficult, we're also living in an exciting time where things will speed up and become eventually more accurate. So I hope that the future of clinical practice will be focusing more, having the physicians having time for the patients and empathy, and the technology doing the hard job of the data analysis and the accuracy.
Amazing.
Yeah, that point you made about the wellness sector in particular, I think that's really, really interesting because one of the things you've got to think about when you're bringing a new company into any market is how does the payer model work? So where is the ultimate remuneration going to come from for that product? I mean, wellness sector here, and I think in the US as well, where you've got insurance-led systems, it's quite difficult to kind of, insurance remuneration for something that is preventative. You've really got to think about how is the money going to flow to your product.
So Jan, please.
So I think it's a really exciting time in the world at the moment because for the vast majority of my career and the generations, before this, it was very much the US and a few Western European nations creating products for themselves that then they sold to the rest of the world. And the rest of us were afterthought, basically. What does it matter that the Japanese woman is so much smaller than the North American man, right? What does it matter that we have different genetics and so different treatments, or workflows are different in a hospital? A hospital in Japan really doesn't look like anything like a hospital in the US. Right? The good thing about the era that we're in now and some of the new technologies that are coming out, AI, democratization, higher education levels across the globe, is that entrepreneurs in their home markets are starting to develop technologies that are perfect for where they are.
For their markets, yes.
For their markets. And so it is no surprise that they get higher adoption
Yeah.
in those markets, right? And it's not so difficult for them to at least have that initial entry point, versus what it always used to be, which is no matter where you are in the world, you can be based in Singapore or you can be based here, you're still developing products for the US market.
Yeah.
And then you scratch your head, why is adoption so hard? Well, it's because you're based here, you may not be fully immersed in how things are done in the US, and you're struggling to understand that. But the product that you've developed doesn't really fit the local ecosystem anymore, right? So I'm actually thankful in many ways that we finally get this opportunity to develop products that are right.
So I just want to add my perspective here, because I'm very fortunate. I'm right now part of developing the whole digital and medtech and deep tech sector in Saudi Arabia in partnership with the Research Development and Innovation Authority there. So I sit in a capacity where I'm bringing deep tech, specifically medtech companies into the country. And this is where the unique opportunity is, that Saudi is looking for all the dreamers and doers to land and bring like the global perspective for a very futuristic healthcare system that we are trying to build. And one thing that I really want to ask as an entrepreneur, because I'm building digital solutions, I am not an AI person, but I have 27 years in clinical management and healthcare. So I think I work with the gurus of AI to build solutions that are actually needed in the clinic settings and all of that. So from that perspective, just one question for the future entrepreneurs, and many of them are here as well. One piece of advice that you have, like how to connect with the relevance of the solution with their customers. Like if you just had one advice for them from each one of your perspective, like just the golden words that you would like to give to the entrepreneurs.
I think Jan's point was really, really well made, and it speaks to what you were just saying as well, and that's contextualization. Because, one of the things, what we do is we take companies from, whether it's the US, to Europe, Middle East, and take them into new international markets. So the thing to think about here is, if you've had some success in your home market and you now want to go international, you have to think about how that contextualizes for that market, for those physiologies, for that healthcare system, for that set of clinicians.
Local content is a must. Like we have to adhere to the local content, adapt. That is the key to success for entrepreneurs and all the tech providers. Like unless we embrace the local content, we can't be successful. That's for sure.
And it's the same with the tech. It's the same with the AI. I mean, AI is a perfect example, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, if you've got an AI solution, what did you train it on? Where did you get the data that you trained your AI solution on? If you've trained an AI for a clinical solution on US data, and then you come and try and plonk it in Saudi Arabia, it's going to have a completely different understanding, and it's going to give you wrong answers.
Yeah. So, Andrew.
Well, I would say spend time at the point of care. Sit in hospitals, like if you're, whatever the solution is, but like see where that solution would be implemented or that technology be implemented, and see how it happens day to day and what people are dealing with. I think you cannot get away from the fact that that's where the solution needs to be done. And I say many times, I see it all the time, I call it testosterone, where people are more enamored with the technology than actually what they're trying to solve. And so the only way you'll get around that is actually spending and seeing how your solution would be implemented.
Yeah, everything comes from, at least for me, clinical observation. So you have to see and listen. That's it, I think. And then ideas and innovation comes.
So that's your message to the entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many engineers that they want to enter the healthcare sector and they have no clue. And I'm partnered with somebody that works in the healthcare sector. Like, you're not going to make it otherwise. You need somebody that is exposed. And either from a patient perspective, so solving a solutions, either at home or either, but you need to come from a real need. Otherwise, it's not going to go.
Yeah.
So absolutely agree. I think that is number one. But just to add a number two, because otherwise it would be a bit boring if I just kept reiterating. Where's the money really coming from? If it's a real problem in that ecosystem, even though it's currently not reimbursed or there's no pathway for it because it's a truly innovative technology, right? You need to figure out who's feeling the pain most acutely, right? And find a direction in through there. Because, you know, I have seen many technologies that the patients really love or the clinicians really love, but they're struggling against the behemoth of a healthcare system, and their days are already so full. They do not have time to fight this battle for you, right? So you as the entrepreneur, as the company, have to do that work for them. You have to direct them into how they're gonna get that funded or get that through their hospital systems administration center. So, you know, after it's correct, you know, it's the right solution for that market, the next step is help the clinicians figure out how to get it paid for, right?
Joanna?
Yeah, my advice is more for you as the entrepreneur, as a person. Is this a problem that you want to spend the next decade of your life solving? Are you passionate enough about it to hear yourself talk about it for the next 5 to 10 years? Because that's how long it takes, right?
Yes.
So I think making sure that that is aligned, that problem and solving that problem is aligned with your goals, your vision for your life, your, you know, your values and so on, is really important before you embark on this journey.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We are on time. Thanks, everyone, and please join me thanking our esteemed panelists.